All right. Well, thanks for joining. Um, I think I know at least one of you knows who I am, but my name is Peter Sommer. I teach jazz and a lot of saxophone these days at Colorado State University up in Fort Collins here, which is where I am now. And but I've been kind of in and around Boulder, Denver area. Before that, when I went to school in Boulder, I've been kind of playing in the Denver area since I don't know, I guess like getting close to 25 years here. And so longtime friends with these fine musicians who work with CCJ, including the folks who've been here the whole time, and a lot of great new friends and musicians who've moved to town. So it's always a pleasure to get to do anything here for CCJ. And it was so nice to be asked to do this. I, on some level, given kind of carte blanche to do something about listening. And so I thought what I would start by doing is talking about something I try to talk about a lot with not just students, but even other musicians I play with. I'm sure to the point where some of them get frustrated with me. But I always say, like, are we actually listening to what we sound like? And when I say that, what I'm trying to say is something I've noticed amongst a lot of the great musicians. You guys mentioned Maria Schneider, who I think would fall in this category as well, of folks who are really concerned not with just the content of what's being played, but what it actually sounds like. When Ingrid Jensen was a guest at CSU, I noticed as we were working with her in the big band, it was more than just like, are we playing the rhythms right? Are we playing the notes right? What scales are you using when you solo there? Blah, blah, blah. It was really about what's the actual sound of the ensemble. What sounds do the drum make? Does the drummer play with when they're playing with her? Same with Rich Perry when he was a guest. Same with both Matt Wilson and John Riley, who are drummers. Like, great concern with the actual sound coming off the stage. And I think as jazz musicians, we spend a lot of time working on our own individual sounds. I don't know of a single saxophone player, for instance, that's not pretty obsessed with what they sound like. And ditto for all the other instruments. Um, but when we get together as a group to play, and a lot of times I think when we listen and kind of work as students and teachers, we don't necessarily put a lot of emphasis on the actual sound. We tend to put a lot more emphasis on kind of what's the content of what's going on. And I don't mean that we don't listen to each other. Please don't get me wrong. I think jazz educators spend a great deal of time getting musicians to listen to each other. But we don't always think about what does the music actually sound like to the listener? What does it actually sound like to someone sitting out front and checking it out? And um, part of the reason I got on this kick was it was a few years ago, well, more than a few years ago, I guess at this point. But one of my friends was chastising me because I was like, I had my phone and I was like, man, check out this new John Scofield thing or whatever. And I played it on my phone. And this person likes music, was not like a serious musician. And they said, is that like how you listen to music all the time? And I said, well, no, sometimes I listen in my car and occasionally I listen, on my iPad speakers, and sometimes I listen on my computer speakers, or, and occasionally I'll pull out headphones and listen. And he says, man, it seems weird that someone that spends their whole life working on music would choose to listen to music with such horrible equipment. And it really got me thinking. And so then, being a grown up now, I guess I went and got nicer speakers, nothing fancy, but something nicer, and a real amplifier. And I got a real turntable, and I got all these things and started listening to music. I'm blessed with a living room that's kind of ideal for listening in this way. It doesn't have like a lot of reflective surfaces. It's got this weird back open side so things don't reflect. It's kind of weird that it just happened to be that way. But so I have this kind of magical room, and I've got the setup in there, and I really started getting into listening to what things actually sound like. And so today I thought what we do is listen to some things. And it's a little selfish. I'm gonna play things that I think sound good, not just sound good like music. I mean, I have stacks of music that sounds good, and even more stacks of music of where people are playing amazing. So these are just a very small sampling of things that I think either the actual recording is really great, or it's very unique in how they recorded it. And and some of it's just fun. These are just fun things to check out. So and I did think Camilla a vocalist, because often this is more of an issue with instrumentalists, because of course vocalists can't, at least in jazz idiom, will pretty much always use amplification to be heard. Like it's really rare to have just like a jazz vocalist just stand up acoustically in front of a group and sing, as opposed to a trumpet player, saxophone player, or something like that. So some of these kind of symptoms of not listening, I actually find way more common in instrumentalists than vocalists. But I did find one thing with the vocalist that I really love. I don't think it's the most natural sounding recording in the world, but it's a very cool recording. So I wanted to play that. So, listening to some things, trying to get back to the ideal of just listening to music as sound, but still listening to jazz music. I mean, it's easy to make a statement like that and throw on Philip Glass or throw on Harry Partch or throw on John Cage, and get into like some really like out, sensory things. But I tried to pick things that I'm like, these are capital J jazz. This is capital J jazz music, but we can still listen to it, really noticing what it sounds like. And we're going to start with one of my favorite recordings. And this is kind of an obscure recording. Oh, and I brought album covers so I could be cool and everything. So this one I only have on CD because it's never been issued on vinyl. And this is this. This is a Joe Lovano album from 1993. I have to look. 94. I was close. So this is when Joe Lovano was certainly famous, but not near as famous as he would be, now and within the past 10 years. This is a great album with Joshua Redman, actually. So this is, I'm being a little selfish here. This is a 2 tenor player album, which I have a lot of these and I love all of them. But this is one of my favorites because it sounds amazing. It's a great Joe Lovano, a great Joshua Redman. Mulgrew Miller on the piano is one of the most amazing piano players, and really amazing in the jazz tradition. Not someone who had like a shtick or anything. Not that I'm not trying to put him above or below anyone else. I'm just saying like really just one of the most amazing straight ahead jazz pianists. It's really sad when he passed away. The great Christian McBride on this, when he was probably 20 or 21. He would have been pretty young at this time. Lewis Nash on drums, who now lives in Arizona again, but the great Lewis Nash, who I love. And then this is also unique about this recording for me, is this has a percussionist, Don Elias, which I don't have anything against percussionists, but I generally dislike it when there's conga players and percussionists with swing music going on. And it's funny because I can think of right off the top of my head 2 or 3 albums that do that I love, but most of the time it's not my favorite thing. So I'm just going to play a little bit, and for the sake of time, it's going to be a drag because I'm probably not going to play all of it. I'm going to play a little bit of just a very straight ahead tune. This is their version of Love is a Many Splendored Thing, which is this goofy old tune. Probably the most famous version was recorded by Clifford Brown on the Live at Basin Street album. For the sake of convenience, I'm just using iTunes for these, so apologies. I hope no shame or guilt, but if you're listening obviously on your computer or iPad, it's probably not going to sound as good as if you're listening on a stereo or something like that. But that's just I understand it's the way things go, and I certainly would rather you. Oh, look at yes. I'd rather you were here and listening than not listening, so don't worry about it either. So you'll notice, I think Joe Lovano will be in your left channel. Josh Redman will show up in your right channel. But what I really want you to notice here is first about how pleasant all the instruments sound. None of these instruments are going to sound harsh at all. They're also going to sound very clear as well. So they're not like bathed in reverb. There's not a lot of weird stuff going on to try to make them turn into sonic cotton candy or something like that. They're just very clear, but also very pleasant sounding, very warm. And you'll also notice the clarity of balance here. If you decide you want to listen to any one individual in the band, you will be able to pick them out very easily. But as a whole, which I hope is the main way you'll listen, as a whole, you'll notice just how clear and beautiful everything sounds. Just like if this was a meal that you cooked and you got all the ingredients and all the balance of everything right, nothing would stand out in such a way to be distracting. So I'll tell a quick story about that about this literal CD I have, and it's funny because like the liner notes are all like I dropped it in the gutter at some point. I can't even open up the cover anymore, which is too bad because there's some cool pictures in there. But I bought this. My parents, when I was in high school, my parents gave me some money in a checking account to go buy Christmas presents for people. And instead, I went to Best Buy and I bought albums for myself. That's what I did. So if you want to know what kind of human being I am, or at least I was when I was in high school, that's what I was. Because it was like, well, they gave me this much money, but I don't need to spend all of that on everybody else. I could spend some of it on myself. And it was a total failure. I did not do the right thing. That was not the right thing. So I remember buying this album on one of those shopping sprees. But that's the CD I use, or the recording. Sometimes I have it kind of download in a higher res version on my phone and things like that. That's what I use when I tweak my speakers or move my speakers around or anything like that. Is I put that album on because I know it sounds great and I love the way it sounds. I even took this in when we did my most recent album, the Septet album. I took this in to the mixing with the studio with Colin, and I said, "Can you just make it sound like this?" And he was and he great audio engineers like Colin are unbelievable. He listened to it. He's like, well, that's like a plate reverb with a whatever, and he could just tell things just from listening to it. We didn't make the whole album sound like that, but I tried to get the reverb on the saxes to at least sound like that. So what are your thoughts, or is there anything you're noticing, or anything you want to comment on? If you do, it's this isn't school. I'm not going to call on people, and no one is required to speak at all. But if you have a comment, I just want to allow time for that to happen. And if not, I'll play you something else, and that's fine too.
I could definitely hear what you pointed out about being able to focus in on any one instrument, but also just the balance overall being so good. And
Yeah,
Mulgre's comping is so good too.
yeah. It's so energetic. It's got but not obtrusive, right? It
Mm-hmm.
really lifts the energy in terms of the rhythmic energy of propulsing everything forward without really getting in the way.
Yeah.
I'm always amazed on this, on how good the piano sounds. It's very hard to get a piano to sound that good when you have all those other instruments playing in the mix, sonically in the mix. The other thing I always find amazing is if you actually listen, you can hear everything Christian McBride plays. But it's not too loud. It's not boomy. It's not obtrusive. It's very well balanced, but you can actually hear his hands on the strings and everything. So, yeah, I just love this recording. I like the music on it as well, and I've listened to it a zillion times. This is obviously from back in the days before, when all I had to listen to were the CDs I owned physically, and so this was one I listened to a lot. Anyone else? You want to hear something else? Deborah, you looked like you were getting ready to. Okay. Well, I can't hear you yet.
I did, I know. I did have a question.
Yeah.
And I think I didn't, I didn't hear Kamala's question. So this might be the same thing. It's like, how
Sure,
much of it is what you're playing, and how much is it in the mix?
That's a great question. And the next thing I'm gonna play is gonna sort of get closer to something more like what the actual band sounds like. So that was recorded. If you could look at the pictures, if my booklet wasn't all like mashed up together, you could see like Joe Lovano and Josh Redman are each in their own booths, which leads me to believe probably the rhythm section is each in their own booths. When you isolate everyone like that, you do gain a lot of control, but you also lose some things. Like the horns, it's harder for them to naturally balance with each other. When everyone's listening to each other through headphones, it's harder to get a really clear sound of what it sounds like, which is also a testament to how good that recording sounds, and that they probably were mostly in separate rooms.
And does it take away from the improvising between the people when you're in separate groups?
I think at that level, no. Like I think when you're Joe Lovano and Mulgrew Miller, no, they could probably just do anything and it would be great.
Okay.
Not going to be a problem.
Right.
But I mean, I will say, when I was younger and I was used to just going to play live, and then I would go in the studio, and it was very hard. It was very different to be, again, because you even if you're not intentionally trying to listen to the way the whole band sounds, you do get used to that sound, and then you go into the studio and it just sounds radically different. No matter what, no matter how great the studio is or anything like that. So Okay, so that's a good example to me of a recording made in the studio. I'm assuming with everyone isolated. It sure looked like it in the photos. I remember looking at those photos very closely to try to figure out what mouthpieces everyone was playing and things like that. So I remember the photos very clearly. Now we're gonna play. I'm gonna play for you the greatest recorded track of a big band in the history of the world, at least according to me. This is my favorite arrangement of a big band chart of all time, and I love this recording. It's the best sounding big band recording, and I'll just go to my grave saying that. So this is from an album. Oh my God, where is it? This is from an album called 20 Years at the Village Vanguard, Mel Lewis Jazz Orchestra. This is one of the few records I had before I even had a turntable. I was just in college and there were like record shops. And if I saw an album I thought I might want someday, I would just buy it. So I don't know if the price tag's not on here, but oh, it is. I paid $5 for this. I paid $5 for this record. But anyway, this album is unique. So this is a Mel Lewis Jazz Orchestra. This is after Thad left the band. It's kind of the great band from the late 80s or mid 80s. So it's like Kenny Werner and Dennis Irwin. It's still Ur Gardner playing trumpet, Joe Lovano, Dick Oates, et cetera, et cetera. Ralph Lama's on this. But this album is unique, and gosh, I don't want to read all this and get in your way. But basically, this was recorded in a large room. So recorded technically in a studio, but recorded like it was a live concert. So it wasn't recorded with every instrument being individually mic'd. Now, when you listen to it, that bass is darn clear. And the piano gets darn clear at times. And also some of the soloists are super clear. So I have a feeling there was probably some extra miking going on to help those, much like they would in the club. The idea was to, they couldn't do the recording for this particular album. There are other albums recorded at the Vanguard, but they couldn't do this particular one at the Vanguard. So they tried to emulate what a concert would sound like in a large space. And it sounds great. This sounds so different than modern big band recordings. I love modern big band recordings, but to me, they do not compare to this. Because in this, now this is getting kind of closer to what I'm talking about, the way our jazz musicians actually listening to what they sound like. In this, you can hear how the trumpets are balancing themselves, how the trombones are balancing themselves, how the saxophones are balancing themselves, how they all work together to create such a swinging unit. This album is also super impressive because that means there's no edits on this album. They actually played all these charts from top to bottom. The solos that the soloists played are the actual solos here. And the first track, I'm sorry I'm getting excited, but I love this track so much. The first track is Thad Jones' arrangement of All of Me. And to me, for me, this is the pinnacle. Like this was the height of big band arranging. And I love Duke Ellington. I mean, like the Duke Ellington Blanton Webster band is like comes down from the mountain, of course, and in various bassy iterations. I'm not trying to take anything away from him. I see Mark Patterson has his album out here of it. Yes, there it is. But to me, like, whatever Francis Ford Coppola accomplished with Apocalypse Now, it's just the height of American filmmaking. It's just mythical. Like this track of All of Me is right up there for it. Okay. Chorus. I love the shout chorus so much. I mean, and there's All That's Freedom is a little like that too, where you have like the trumpets, the upper voices up playing the melody, and then the trombones, instead of supporting, have this other line that goes underneath. It's kind of like counter to what we're usually taught for like standard big band shout choruses. And it's just so good. Every time that comes, I get excited. My little story about this was, since this was one of the few albums I had before I had a real system, once I actually bought a real turntable and a system, I was so excited. This is like a guy in his early 40s, so it's really maybe it's like Christmas for middle-aged bald guys. But it's like I would run downstairs in the morning and be like, well, I only have like 3 albums, but one of them is this one. So every morning at like 6:30 or 7, I would put on this album and crank it. And my poor wife Kristen would come down and be like, Peter, it's like 7 in the morning. Don't you think it's maybe a little early for the big band music? I'm like, no, it's so good. Have you heard this? So she was really happy when I got other things that I could play, other than just Thad Jones, every morning when I was eating breakfast. So anyway, I love that track very much, and I always find new things in it. And the whole album is great. It's just that's the very first track. That's always the one I know. And to me, it's like the perfect. It's got every little part of a traditional big band chart you would want to have. It's 5 minutes and 14 seconds long. You know, it doesn't overstay its welcome. It knows exactly what it's supposed to do. It's
How about
so
American
excellent.
Express?
American Express at the end is great. And I do like Interloper a lot too, even though that chart is the opposite. That chart was like Thad doing everything he could possibly do in one chart. It's like the most overwritten chart in the world. And then some poor tenor player has to solo, and you don't hear anything they play because there's like just constant backgrounds the whole time. And the trumpet parts are impossible. But it's still it's a cool tune and a cool melody. But
That's funny.
yeah. So anyway, that's that.
Peter,
That's
can I get you to
Sure.
say the name of the album again if I want to
Yes.
find it?
Yes, and it is streaming too if you want to do that. But this is the Mel Lewis Jazz Orchestra. It's called 20 Years at the Village Vanguard.
Great, thanks.
There's like a Jerry Dodgian tune on here. Butter, so good. So yeah, so to me that the in addition to just I love the album and I love listening to it, is I love the way it sounds. I really do. It's just a beautiful sounding recording. I feel like I'm actually sitting in front of a band listening to a band rather than feeling a digital mix of a band, which is just the modern way we do things because it's efficient and our music is hard, and that way we can get everything right and we can mix balance it. I mean, I know why we do it. It's not an indictment of that. It's just that there's a certain sound to that that's really hard to get otherwise, and I really do like it a lot. And I notice a lot of things about it, and I enjoy it. So yeah, and the great Dennis Irwin, man. I like Dennis Irwin's one of those guys I just buy albums with Dennis Irwin on it all the time. Peter Washington's like that too. I would go to Dazzle anytime Peter Washington was playing someone. I would go to Dazzle to see if it didn't matter who the band was. I was like, I just want to hear Peter Washington play the bass. Man, where to go from there? I have way too much stuff, of course. What would be a good counter to that? Okay, I think I want to play something from ECM, just because I think ECM records have a very particular sound. I would not say it's like what we just heard, in that ECM albums tend to not sound like you're actually sitting in the room with the band. They have a very, at least I'm not talking about the very earliest albums, which are pretty raw. I'm talking about once they got kind of developed and they were producing everything in-house and all that kind of stuff. So one of my favorite ECM albums, and I'm not a huge Pat Metheny fan, but this particular album I do love, and it's this album called 8081. I'm trying to get it to shine in the light right there. This is one of the first albums I bought when I got a turntable. And this album has one of my favorite pairings of bass players and drummers. And that's the great Charlie Hayden on bass and the great Jack DeJohnette on drums. And Jack DeJohnette's one of these figures, when I think of the folks, like if I could only keep a dozen jazz musicians to listen to for the rest of my life, you know, you have what you would expect. You have, you know, your Sonny Rollins and your John Coltrane and your Thelonious Monk. But I always want to put Elvin Jones and Jack DeJohnette in there because and again, it's got really everything to do with the way they sound. Like the actual sound of Jack DeJohnette's drums, even though they change over the years and uses different cymbals and different drum companies but there's a sound to Jack DeJohnette playing the drums that I just love. And I'm not saying that everyone should love it, but for me, this is a very particular thing. And so I also love this because I don't know if I don't know if it's really going to show up, but this is like the most like a late 70s, early 80s like picture of a band ever. This is the great Dewey Redman over here. And this is a great Michael Brecker over here. I also love the fact that there's an album in this world that has both Dewey Redman and Michael Brecker playing together on it, because that I mean, I don't mean that. I'm sure they loved each other and loved playing together now, but it's just not the first combination you think of when you think of a two tenor player album. So I'm going to play a track off of this. I hadn't quite decided what to play. I think I want to play. I think I'm going to play some of the title track, 8081, which has Dewey on it, Dewey Redman on it. The first track is amazing. It's this two folk songs thing. It's just, but it's like 20. It's a whole album side. It's like 20 minutes long. But that's like peak Jack DeJohnette going nuts if you're looking for that. But this track, 8081, is like an Ornette Coleman tune. It's funny how many musicians later wrote tunes that were trying to be Ornette Coleman tunes, to the point where we almost associate the tunes that they were writing to be like Ornette Coleman tunes more like Ornette Coleman tunes than the actual Ornette Coleman tunes. Keith Jarrett's like that too, another good example. But this is a Pat Metheny tune called 8081. Let me pull it up here. And we may or may not listen to all this one, but I just want to play. I think it's important though, because ECM records have this kind of they lean into the reverb, but it's a particular it's a particular kind of reverb. It's not super like washy and kind of oversaturated. It's kind of more crystalline in a way. It's really shimmery, but they do a great job recording drums in particular. You get a lot of life in the drums. And they get great sounds from the bass and the saxophone too. So this is 8081. We probably want, again, it's a little long, but we'll listen to some of it here. So again, really love the combination of Charlie Haden and Jack DeJohnette here, and then really like if you don't love Dewey Redman's sound and just his spirit, then you check your pulse there. But so I love that. Again, there's just such a sound to Jack DeJohnette's drums. There's such a sound to Charlie Haden's bass, and the two of them together, especially recorded by a studio that can get such great sounds out of the instrument. It's just so appealing. It's just so sonically enjoyable to listen to. And I like Pat Metheny. He's fine. He doesn't move me in the same way as these other guys. But even there's just the sound of the guitar working together with them. The mix is just so wonderful. And just the time feel they're able to create. So I do like that recording quite a bit. And all the tracks are nice. There's a couple tracks on the last little bit that are starting to move. They're getting a little too smooth for my taste. Trying to make a little too much cheddar on those last few tracks for my taste. But some of it, it's also a weird time. Like, you have Pat Metheny in particular. He's making these albums where some of the tracks are clearly like he's trying to get on the radio, and then other tracks are like wild free jazz takes with Dewey Redman and Michael Brecker both blowing at the same time. It's like, wow, who is this album for exactly? I don't get it. I mean, which I love. I love that things like that can exist. My story. So my Jack DeJohnette story. I guess I have a little story for every recording. My Jack DeJohnette story is. My good friend Shiloh Stroman, who plays the drums, when we were in high school together, he knew I loved listening to Jack DeJohnette. And so he bought me a pair of Jack DeJohnette drumsticks, which I still have to this day. And he bought me a practice pad. And so I had a VHS tape of the Keith Jarrett Standards Trio, the special recorded in Tokyo called Standards 2. It was a VHS tape I recorded off of PBS. And I would go into the basement, my house, my parents' house, and I would put this VHS tape in, and I would sit with my practice pad and my stick, and I would just sit there, and I just put the practice pad on the table, and I would just play ride cymbal patterns with Jack DeJohnette, just for the whole thing, just for the whole like hour-long thing, over and over again. And I still attribute that to this day to the fact that I think my time is okay. Like that I just spent so much time moving my body as a teenager along with Jack DeJohnette and Gary Peacock and Keith Jarrett playing the drums like every night for an hour or plus. For, I don't know, I didn't do it forever, for like a month or something like that. And I just improvised. I mean, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was just like in there having a good time. But I was like, Jack had this terrible flannel shirt on and black leather pants in the video, and I'm just kind of like looking at him. And there was a cockpit camera behind him sometimes, and he'd play, and I'd be like trying to do things. I was just enthralled with just the idea of the drums and how it works. And I still wish I could play the drums better. Maybe in my next life. But anyway, any thoughts, questions, or comments, anything like that?
I'm with you entirely about the idea that it not only is what you play, but it should sound good too.
Yeah, it's I think if I have a thesis here, it's that music should actually sound good as like sonic waves hitting your ears, not just sound good because we know that it's you're playing something hip on an altered dominant, or that it sounds good because the tune is in seven or something like that. There should be a sonic appeal to it. Now there is a danger of decadence, meaning there's a danger you just say like, well, I just want soft, gushy, shiny cotton candy things that just feel like I just want to listen to, like nature documentary soundtracks all night and just like feel the sound bathe all over me. So I'm not necessarily advocating that, but I am saying that it's possible to have both. It's possible to have very rich music. I mean, if we look at the Western canon, like like if you listen to a great recording of the Bartok string quartets, that is rich music that also is probably recorded pretty well. Classical musicians are pretty aware of this. Like they aren't like just hanging out like, oh, whatever it sounds like is fine. They're very aware of balance. They're very aware of what it sounds like in the hall. They don't play the same in the same. They don't play the same regardless of the space they're playing in. They will play differently depending on the space. I would even argue, I think sometimes, like I've played in like Brazilian bands, sometimes I think some of these kind of more pop and dance oriented groups are a little more concerned than jazz musicians are. Jazz musicians are pretty far down on the rung, I find, of folks that are usually really listening to what the band sounds like. They're concerned with being able to hear each other. That's not what I'm saying. It's more about what's the actual all over sonic product that's being produced. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes the venues are just going to be hard. Like the sound system's not great, or the room just doesn't sound good, and there's just nothing you can do. But when we have some control, it's nice to take control. Yeah, and that's why I like listening to music acoustically. I love playing with the great bass player Kent McClagan in Denver, who certainly is not on social media, as Camilla and I were talking about earlier. But Kent pretty much always plays acoustically, and it's like this is the easiest it is for me to play on the saxophone when I play with Kent. He makes it challenging in other ways. He's certainly not gonna like just do what I expect, but at least sonically, I love playing with Kent because it's like, oh yeah, I can hear him. I can actually hear what his bass sounds like. I can hear what I sound like in relation to that. I can hear piano always, which I like. I like being able to hear the piano. For me, it's a kind of an ongoing thing, not just for my own saxophone playing, but even when I play, like what can I do to try to contribute to the group trying to hear better. And I try, sometimes I complain and moan to the band, but I'm trying to like not be a drag. But sometimes it's just too loud. Sometimes it's too soft. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes people have to play in a way that's uncomfortable for them, like pianists. Like sometimes have to bang the crap out of the piano, and it's like, man, can we play in such a way that still is energized, that they don't have to play like that? That'd be nice, Or Mark on the trombone, for instance. Like, it's if Mark, can we play somehow where Mark, and it doesn't have to do with the PA. Like, I mean, you can turn me up all you want in the monitor. I still feel like I have to blast if the band is loud enough. It's just about presence. So I think to me, it starts with just like, I'm trying to get better at making pour over coffees. I'm terrible at it. But at this point, I'm just in a stage of trying to even identify what flavors are. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh my God, I've been tasting coffee my whole life, and I have no idea what coffee tastes like. Like, I mean, I know like on a real general level, but not really. Like, I can't identify the difference between all these different kind of flavor palettes. So I'm having to develop that. So I think as music lovers and musicians, the first step is to actually sit and listen to music and try to listen to it as sound, not just listen to it as content I'm trying to steal things from so I can go play it myself on my gigs, which is definitely the easiest way for me to listen to music. So that's kind of my thesis. And if you folks are back next week, we can continue to kind of listen to these things. Or if you want to do something more traditional where I play something and we listen for the way people interact or the way they approach soloing, I'm happy to do that as well. But I wanted to start here because when I thought about active listening and deep listening or whatever, I thought, really the first step is to just actually listen to sound and not just ignore the sound and try to get to the stuff past the sound. which is unfortunately what we're taught in music school most of the time, and what we sometimes do to try to learn the content faster. Is there any other thoughts or comments?
What about the sound of Jack DeJohnette cymbal playing versus Roy Haynes later?
I saw your chat there. I forgot about it till just now, but I like Roy Haynes. I actually came upon Roy Haynes much later in life. I mean I had him on recordings when I was in high school, but it was definitely later in college before I was really aware of who Roy Haynes was and how great he was. I think a good comparison that I'll make, and so I can get back to you, Mark, and speak more intelligently, is there's a Chick Corea album called Trio Music Live. There's another one called Trio Music. I don't think I have that, but I have Trio Music Live with Miroslav and Roy, and that's an ECM album. It's live, but it's recorded really well. So I'll check that out next to some Jack DeJohnette ECM. But I do love Roy Haynes. I have Roy Haynes on lots of things and dig him quite a bit. Do you mean his actual sound, or do you mean how he plays? I assume you mean sound based on all the stuff we're talking about.
I was thinking of sound.
Yeah.
Like Now He Sings, Now He Sobs also.
Oh yeah, I'll check that out too. I don't remember that being particularly beautifully well recorded, but I'll go. But it's still something you can listen to and enjoy and dig and all that. That's probably my favorite Chick Corea album. Is Now He Sings, Now He Sobs. I like that one a lot, and I like this Origin album called Change. I usually bring that to folks too. So as long as, just to show that I'm not all sunshine and rainbows, a good example of an album that I think doesn't sound great is like the Chick Corea 3 Quartets album, which has some remarkable musicianship on it. I mean, just unbelievable playing, but just some of the harshest recorded sounds from an era that they really probably could have got better sound. So if you're looking for that bad cup of coffee to compare something that's pleasing sounding versus something that's kind of harsh, that's a good one to check out. It's a good one to check out because they play so great. But if you're looking for like something where the sounds are a little bit like they added a little too much salt to that particular meal, or they added a little too much something, that's a good one. I heard that recently because someone mentioned the album, and I was like, oh, I haven't listened to that in a long time. And I put it on. I was like, man, these guys are amazing musicians, and this is really hard to listen to, but I'm going to hang with it just for a little bit longer, just to get some more music out of it. Anyone else? Annie, I saw you unmuted.
Do you think that like that album, which by the way, is that a live album, or is that
no?
That was
it's definitely in studio, and
okay.
yeah.
But do you think like some of that, like, is maybe what's trendy at the time?
Yes, that's
for
absolutely
like
what it is.
Just preferences, or just what everyone else is doing.
Yes, I think that's what that album suffers from, is because it's Steve Gadd and it's Eddie Gomez and Brecker. And they are all playing mostly in fusion bands right around that time. And I think the recording techniques were almost trying to get closer to this kind of forward sound, even though they're all playing acoustic instruments. And so you end up with this weird kind of hybrid where it's recorded like electronic music, but they're playing acoustic instruments. I actually think that's exactly what it is. I think that's the trend of the time.
What was the time thing?
Yep.
That's fun.
Yes. And that is interesting too, to kind of go through different eras of history. I mean, I didn't want to get too deep into it, but Blue Note albums are very interesting because Rudy Van Gelder is recording those horns really with too much gain all the time, so they're pretty much like maxed out. But we associate that sound so much with those albums that we love it. We know the way Speak No Evil sounds, and we know the way that all those Art Blakey albums sound, and we've listened to them a zillion times, and we associate that with the sound of jazz. And I'm not suggesting they sound bad. I'm just saying that was a very particular aesthetic that we kind of got used to. So maybe if there were more recordings like 3 quartets that we listened to with that level of intensity, we would just be like, oh yeah, that's just that sound. That's just that thing we do. But in comparison to a lot of the rest of the albums to its left or right in history, because when you move into the 90s, man, there's a ton of beautiful recordings. Those guys were just on the case. There's a few engineers that I kind of dig through and like, I was like, I bet this was recorded by so-and-so, like James Farber. There's another guy I'm forgetting, where they all sound great. Like every Brad Meld album sounds awesome. Every Joshua Redman album sounds awesome. Not every Kenny Garrett album, but most of the later ones sound, they kind of, things get to a point where they're just kind of churning it out really over and over again. So, but that's a little different. Early 80s is a little different in that time. So good. Well, I know we're running. We should wrap it up here. I don't want to keep you guys all night. This will turn into like an all night, like beers after the gig. Like let's talk
About to hang, baby.
XYZ. That's right. So we'll be back next week.